Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I am delighted to have someone who's become a good friend. We met on the Help for Heroes bike ride through the big battlefields of northern France and Belgium, where he's a phenomenal ambassador for Help for Heroes. He's got a great story, which I hope he will tell us later on, of the tough times he went through and how he's bounced back. He's built like a house. I mean, the strongest muscular guy I've ever come across. He's on a cycle and he's pedaling away, going up these hills. I don't know how he does it. Overtook me at speed. But Nick, it's great to have you here on the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great. So, Nick, just tell us a little bit about where you're working now. Since leaving the forces, because you've been to the Defence Academy. You were, if I remember, a major in the Queen's Dragoon Guards, but had a horrific experience and got injured very badly, which I'd like to talk about later on, if you don't mind. But just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career. Just maybe a thumbnail sketch.
Thanks, Jonathan. So, Nick Garland, I now work for a company called CDW, a large technology company based out of London. They're an American company, but we work in the UK as well. And I head up their secure government and defence part of the business. Previous to that, as you mentioned, I was in the Army for 13 years. I joined the Queen's Dragoon Guards, commissioned into the Queen's Dragoon Guards, where I spent many happy years travelling the world, meeting new people, and doing some fun stuff, some interesting stuff, and like most jobs, some mundane stuff as well. And as you touched on, I was unfortunately medically discharged due to an injury that I sustained very early in my career that did eventually catch up with me. But great times had, many new friends made, and now I'm in my second phase of career.
Yeah, well, we're definitely, Nick, going to talk about that horrendous time you went through, because you draw many lessons from it and have an incredible view on life, but it must have been very, very tough. But talking about inspiring leadership, which is the theme of this podcast, and you certainly inspired me when you spoke to us all about what you'd been through and why Help for Heroes was such a great charity that you are an ambassador for, helping the wounded like yourself. But yeah, talk about a couple of leaders. You mentioned Gordon and you mentioned Oz. Would you tell us who these two people are and what qualities they have that you have found inspiring?
So I've worked for Gordon, General Messenger, and also I've heard Oz speak, met with him a number of times. I'm fascinated by where he's going with his insightful business. I worked for General Messenger back in 2009 as a very junior subaltern. He wouldn't have known who I was at the time, but I was one of his many that deployed to Afghanistan as part of the Op Herrick 3 Commando Brigade commitment. And it just so happened that I ended up meeting the then or the now general in a place called Headley Court many months after my deployment. And inspirational leader, brigade commander at the time, fascinating, clear direction that then stemmed down through his organization, working with the Royal Marines. Great to see a very different part of the military doing phenomenal things. And everybody had a good word to say about him. And then when I was fortunate enough to meet him in Headley Court, his approach to, and I say this as it's intended, the boys on the ward at the time, because it was mostly men on the intensive care ward there, it was like an aura had arrived and everybody was uplifted by his presence. He just understood his people so very, very well. And he was personable, intimately personable with them, which had a huge uplifting impact on the recovery process, the mental robustness of the team. And actually that didn't just last momentarily, but for weeks and weeks after his visit, there was a positivity amongst those that were on the ward at the time. And just an incredible man, clear direction, and went off to do phenomenal things during the NHS's sort of COVID crisis.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to work out what he's doing at the moment. Is he governor of the Tower of London at the moment?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I met him at Windsor Leadership in Windsor Castle at one of the events, and just because this podcast is listened to people about 130 countries around the world, and thousands of people listen to it. A number are from different forces, military forces around the world, and an awful larger number are business leaders, CEOs, C-suites, and the like. And so they're always interested in hearing these stories, but also how does that translate to me in business? And, you know, his qualities he's an inspirational leader wherever you find him. He doesn't have to have a gun in his hand, or people think, oh, it's just he's in the military and people do whatever he says because he's a senior officer. People would follow him regardless because he just has those qualities, don't you think?
You've hit the nail on the head there, Jonathan. I think it's his personable skills, and some, you know, that you're in the presence of an inspirational leader or a leader when they walk into the room and they, I would say, command the floor, but they raise the attention of everybody in the room, and people almost stop what they're doing, or they listen, and they become captivated in the presence of said person. And General Gordon had that very much about him, which is almost certainly why he was selected to go off and do the Nightingale hospitals and everything else that he went on to do during the HS, where we had a moment of crisis in the country, needed some clear guidance, and he delivered it. So yeah, fascinating.
Fantastic. So tell us about Oz Alassi as well.
So I met Oz in America last year, and Oz is a former British Army officer with a phenomenal career of his own. And he then went on to set up a company called CyberSafe. And CyberSafe do internet security or cyber security for people. And they put people first in cyber technology. And as we all, I think, as we are becoming more and more aware that technology is more of an actor when it comes to, or an enabling activity for cyber crime, Oz's organization that he founded is there to set it up. And the way that he did, is there to combat the human element of cyber crime. And the way that he presented a very difficult, often technical challenge to a huge audience in America was one of clarity, understanding, but also bringing it back to first principles that everybody in the audience understood. So Oz is a great guy, and if you can, Jonathan, you should very much get him on the podcast.
Well, it would be lovely to have him on, and particularly when he's helping people, individuals who are the victims of cybercrime, because if everybody thinks it's sort of, oh, it's corporations, they get attacked. No, individuals get their identities taken, they get their life savings removed them. So I think that's going to be very important. And good news with his business, CyberSafe. And they're talking about businesses. You're in your wife's office, and people listening won't be able to see, but those on YouTube will. And you've got the quartermaster store behind you of your wife's fabulous stuff that she has on her interior design business. What's it called for those people who need her skills, Nick?
It's quite awkward, actually. So we have a separate office from the house, and I had to message before I came in here and saying, actually, I need the office because my office isn't so well laid out and so light and bright as this. But my wife's company is Katie Garland Designs, and she looks after contemporary interiors based out of Wiltshire. But yeah, as you can see, it's full of the nicety things of homes and interior.
Well, I hope that Katie, is it Katie Garland Interior Designs? I hope it goes well, goes from strength to strength. So she must be a special lady to stand by you, particularly when you went through your horrendous injury. So let's go into that, Nick. You know, there you were serving, I think, in Afghanistan, in the turret of your armored vehicle, when all hell breaks loose. How would you like to tell us the story? Because I think it is an important story. Do it in whichever order you want, but it's an important one for us to hear about and learn from.
So I guess I'll set the scene, and then we can talk about, sort of, as I refer to it, my bad day in the office. And I try and align trauma or challenge with, we can all relate to trauma and challenge, and we all have our own traumatic injuries, our traumatic experiences, because trauma doesn't necessarily mean something significantly bad physically, but it can be something that lasts with an individual for a significant amount of time. And therefore my bad day in the office was in 2009 in a place called Musakala, which was in the northern part of Helmand province, and I was there under the auspices of deploying with the Queen's Dragoon Guards under 3 Commando Brigade. And at that particular moment in time, we had just taken over from another unit that was in theatre at the time, and we were there to hold the enemy line, or effectively hold the enemy line, so that the district centre of Musakala could be secured by the host nation, the Afghan National Forces, and provide a ring of security. And we were effectively that outer ring of security for the local population. It was about, I can't remember exactly the right time, but early in the morning, so just after first light, And as was often the case, the enemy were set to challenge us militarily, and they did exactly that. And they launched a sort of a full frontal attack on the compound or the building known as a patrol base during that tenure that we were stationed in. And we effectively we were almost there, like, I say bees on honey, but we were there to draw the enemy into a position where a lot of the reconstruction and capacity building could happen behind us in the safety of the ground further to our north at the time. And we'd been in combat for, I don't know, 45 minutes or so, when some very accurate enemy fire came over. I was on the roof of the compound with a colleague of mine, well, a number of colleagues of mine at the time, and rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, flew over the top. Some fell short, one hit the building, and one airburst just right in front of us, probably about 1.5 meters, 2 meters away, shattering. And they're designed to shatter as a grenade would in the air, and of course it's flying at a huge pace. And so when it shatters, it fires bits of molten metal across a vast area, and they got it absolutely right, and they covered the roof with shards of metal. One of which, size of a 50p piece, hit me. One of which hit the squadron sergeant major, and another one hit the javelin gunner off to the left, causing a bit of havoc during our early office call.
Wow. And that piece, I think, if you're watching, you've got a mark there on your neck where it went into your windpipe. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. It looks a bit, for those that can see, it looks a bit like a tracheostomy sort of scar, because it went in just below my Adam's apple, and it went in down my windpipe, because I was in the prone position, so lying down. It went down my windpipe, through my thyroid, through my artery, and into my left lung. And it was well, I say expectedly, but actually at the moment in time, it was very unexpectedly hot inside my chest, as obviously it had burnt its way through. So yeah, it made a bit of a mess inside, had an arterial bleed, which then led to a significant amount of blood loss. And
if I remember it, on the Casualty helicopter, which getting into this kind of war zone in helicopters to evacuate you out, you, if I'm right, died twice on the helicopter on the way out, and they had to resuscitate you.
That's what they told me when I woke up. Yeah. It's I don't remember a huge amount about the helicopter ride home, because I'd sort of slipped into unconsciousness between getting off the roof of the compound and then finding my way back, or making my way back through the incredible Casavat chain, which had so many positive people that got me home all the way back to Birmingham a number of weeks later.
Because that was what struck me in your story, was just your recognition of all the people along the chain and the amazing job that they did to save your life and the lives of other people. And I'd like you to come on to that in a minute. But before we do, I'm curious to know what happened to your squadron sergeant major and the javelin gunner. Did they live? Were they killed? What happened?
No, they both lived, and they're both in good health now. Squadron sergeant major went on to be a late entry officer, and I think he's recently left the army. And a couple of years afterwards, the team medic, javelin gunner, who had received at that moment in time what appeared to be a very small fragment of RPG into his side, and I'm told it was the size of sort of your small fingernail, tiny little puncture wound. But went in and unfortunately went through both small and large intestine, and made a huge had a huge impact on his well-being and his life going forward. But he now works and lives in Wales, and like most of us, has started a new life many years ago.
But this is the thing in meeting you, Nick, and just as you were powering along on that cycle, and as I say, you've looked after yourself. You've got yourself incredibly strong and fit, and then to see this this power you could put in this. I would not have known that you'd gone through what you're about to tell us about. So I think there's a lesson for me, and maybe others listening, is that never judge anybody else you meet. You wouldn't know if you met this chap of, small nick the size of your fingernail that had gone in there and caused all those kind of problems. And, you meet people, you do not know their story. If you meet my brother who got stabbed by a person there's a court case going through with the whole thing, a person who broke into his house and stabbed him, you wouldn't know what my brother had been through. And so I think it's just a lesson. You've got to get to know people, understand their story and the journey that they're going through. And just, I think at the moment, just to acknowledge, as we're recording this, Nick, some horrendous attacks by Hamas onto Israel with, outside concerts where they were just massacring everybody, people being killed, and then their pictures being put on their own Facebook wall, and just atrocities, and people being taken as hostages back into Gaza. I'm just, your heart and mind, I think we were discussing this earlier, goes out to those families and those people and all that's going on. And we hope that whole situation can calm down and be resolved. But I don't think it will for a long time. But this is another war, and you were in a war. So let's just go back to you in this situation. So you were going back down the chain of command, about the medical chain rather. What happened next, Nick? And tell us what happened then.
Huge amounts of stuff happened around me, and I think that's probably what I'm going to come on to shortly, Jonathan. Is I was blissfully unaware most of the time of what was actually happening, and I say that with a positivity that will never be forgotten. Is the system is so very good, and it's the same for the NHS as well. And I know that they get an awful lot of hardship, but the system is so very good when it works, and it works so very well. But I was injured, and they have there is a sort of a golden hour that you have to be back to a primary medical care facility within an hour, or your chances of survival change significantly. I was so very fortunate that by the time of which I'd realised that I'd been injured, and it did take a couple of seconds for me to realise, within probably 20 seconds, I had seen a medic, and she ultimately had gone on to provide that immediate trauma care, life-saving care. I then also went on to meet various other people in the chain, and I'll talk about those separately. But ultimately, I'm blissfully unaware. I woke up in Selly Oak Hospital 3.5 weeks later, to find myself slightly disappointed, that I was in Birmingham, nothing against Birmingham, of course, but I wasn't where I had intended to be. And I needed to get back on the road to recovery. And that was my main effort, was getting, selfishly at that moment in time, was about me getting back to where I had been, to go and do what I needed to do with the guys that I was there with at the time.
And that in itself must take a phenomenal amount of resilience, determination, when you are so disabled by your injury, and you're down to not just 0, you're down to -20, and you've got to work to get up to 0 and then get back to the incredible place you're at. Where does that determination and drive come from? That, was it your upbringing? Was it your parents? Was it, where does this come from? I know as officers we've got a lot of drive and determination, as many leaders have, but what gave you that fight back?
I don't think it's anything I've really considered. Small stages, small steps. I came from a military family. Both of my parents were in the Air Force, and I had a very good, normal upbringing. And my sister and I had a very normal life growing up, which was great and full of fun, and lots of love from a strong family, which was really, 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 really good. In terms of getting better and getting back to work, I think for me there was a false horizon. I was never going to walk out of the hospital bed and go, I'm off. The doctors knew it. My then girlfriend, now wife, knew it. My family knew it. But everybody said, oh yes, sort of a little bit sarcastically, oh sure, you'll be fine. And the reality was, I couldn't walk because I'd been in bed for 3.5 weeks. So I had to learn to walk again, had to learn to wash again, had to learn to self-sustain. And by knocking down each and every one of those sort of targets, it was, oh, I can, and I can, and I can. And before too long, I realized that actually, sadly, on doctor's advice, when he said, you shouldn't be leaving the hospital at this stage. Well, I signed myself out, not the smartest thing I should have done. I got home and came crashing down to earth, and the reality that my poor girlfriend then struggled with, or didn't struggle with, was hugely supportive, but I was not fit and capable of being at home, but managed to get myself up and about eventually. And I then ended up walking to the local surgery, which was about 1.5 miles away from the house, on crutches. And I arrived, as you would do in any normal surgery in the UK. There was no fish tank in this particular one, but you can imagine lots of people of a certain age in the surgery on a Tuesday afternoon or whenever it was. And in comes a guy who's just come off lots of morphine, full of sweat, on crutches, and said, "I need to see a doctor because I've just been shot in the neck in Afghanistan." And the surgery stops and says, "Well, why are you here?" "Well, because I need to see somebody twice a day for the next 4 or 5 weeks until my packaging in my neck gets better." And so walking to the surgery twice a day, it was a thing. I had to do it. I did it. Again, lots of love and support on the periphery that enabled me to do it. And that was a mentality, and huge setbacks along the way. But equally, you just keep pushing and you keep making it happen.
Wow, Nick, I'm just taken by that. I mean, on the crutches, walking to the surgery. So many of us complain about little things in life. This is how irritating. I'm stuck in traffic. I mean, I think with my brother David, who died of cancer a couple of years ago, he'd do anything to be stuck in traffic. He's not alive anymore. And you fought back, you came back, but of course you lost so many of your colleagues as well who were killed and are not alive anymore. How do you sort of come to terms with that and the grief of losing soldiers and colleagues and people in the army who were killed on operations?
So on Herrick 9, when I came home, I was very fortunate, and my recovery was focused on me and getting me back to work, and thankfully for me and my immediate unit at that time, there was no loss on that particular tour.
Wow.
Fast forward a few years, and in between my first and my second tour, people that I knew at Sandhurst had sadly died from Sandhurst, had sadly died in Afghanistan. And I think and again on my second tour, some colleagues also died, and it was just so very. The realization of warfare kicks in when death is final, injury is temporary. Injury is temporary until it becomes a permanent injury and you live with it. But death is final and it's ending. And one of the many things that stands out, and which I'm sure everybody in Camp Bastion will, or those that were in Camp Bastion will remember, is going to those repatriation ceremonies and the solemnness, the loneliness, the sadness, the realization of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that stays with you, and that stays with you for life. And we reflect in November on those days.
Yeah, and of course, everything that everybody's given, the injury that's changed your life, others who've died, and the commitment that people in the armed forces make to an operation, to a country, which then, of course, now we're no longer there and the Taliban are back again. How do you come to terms with all the sacrifice that's gone on and then it's all just thrown away?
I don't look at it as that we've thrown it away. My 3 tours of Afghanistan were there to make the lives of those of the population better. And I think at the time that we were there, we did exactly that. And I think through hardship comes good eventually, and we're in a cycle. And I can't really comment on what's happening there now, because I struggled somewhat with when we left Afghanistan, and the manner in which we did as a coalition or a Western world, because I think we were so very close to breaking the backbone of a society that was actually making huge headway in developing, and meeting young men and very young girls there that were positive about their futures. And that was really what it was all about, is creating positivity for the future generations. So to see where it is now, it saddens me, and I'm sure it saddens every veteran, both in terms of everybody that's been there and seen where it was going and where it is now. Difficult time.
No, I think it's a very healthy way. We just had Willow's just joined the podcast, my little black working cocker, who is a bit starstruck about being on YouTube. I think that's a very healthy and a very positive view of the contribution that you make. And there's many things outside your control, which you have. You do the best you can do with what you've got to make a difference to the lives of the people who are there, to bring order and peace to a country. But you can't decide what's going to happen to their future and how history will turn, as we're seeing around the world right now. It's a very unstable time, whether it be with Ukraine and the Russian invasion there, or whether it's with what's going on with Hamas and Israel and battles in Africa and all around the world. So Nick, it's one hell of a story. Who do you want to particularly call out who really made a difference to helping you and the lives of others? Maybe and then we'll go on to some other experiences in life and things like that. But who do you want to particularly call out?
I mean, I can name names, but I think actually it's more than naming names. It's more about roles that people fulfill. And for me, there were a number of stakeholders that were central to me. First of all, my survival, but then also my recovery, and that's the family immediately, obviously. But also it was the medic, the stretcher bearer, the door gunner, the pilot who flew on no fuel to take me home. It was the intensive care nurse who bed bathed me for 3.5 weeks. It was the doctors, the many doctors that looked after me. And it was then my support network, my peer groups, my friends, my family, all of which played a vital part in self-development of me, and also getting me back onto the road to recovery, and then ultimately getting me back to full health and work.
Well, no, thank you, Nick. It's lovely the way you acknowledge this. And if you can draw any lessons, if you can, out of such a horrendous experience, the life-changing injury that you received in war, what would the lessons be from all that you've been through, and how you brought yourself back from that very, very dark place?
I think for me, the darkness of the place that I found myself in was not actually selfishly on me. It was the impact that my journey had on others, and still in some instances does. And we talk around post-traumatic stress and all of those other things. I've been so very fortunate that I haven't suffered directly on that. But I know that people on my journey, and I say my journey, the injury that I was part of, have been part of that. And they've had some intrusive thoughts and some difficulties there. So I think in realizing everybody has their own story, and everybody has and you touched on it earlier, Jonathan, but everyone has their own story, and never judge that book, because what impacts you in a positive or a negative light might have a different view or a different understanding from the person that's seen, witnessed, received, heard, whatever it may be. And I take that through into my working life now, is we all have past experiences that influence future decisions, and understanding those enables us to get the best out of people. So
yeah. That's a really good one. And now you're in business, and in an American tech company, and I work with a number of American tech companies. What have you found in bringing your skills as an army officer and a leader into business? What do you find is transferable in the sort of skills that they look for, that you bring with you?
I'm not a technologist, ironically, and I'll probably get shot tomorrow for saying so. But the reality is, I believe I'm a people person, and I try and get the most out of people. And if there is one unifying thing within a military or military leadership cycles, or business, or charitable or third sector work, it's people always will make or fail a business and an organization. And so getting the best out of people, and everyone has different motivators, and everybody has different mechanisms for what they view success to be like. And if you can make the personal, professional, and organizational successes in my view, in that logical flow, personal, professional, and organizational successes, then people will be suitably motivated in the workplace to deliver the best outcomes for themselves, for their professional development, and then for the organization as a whole, to collaboratively achieve more.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely way of looking at it. And I also I'm thinking about, our upbringing and how you and I both came into the army. We both I think we been to grammar schools, or I think the local school, rather
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
with some of our fellow officers. They were from certain public schools, and there was a little bit of one-upmanship going on in that environment. But you came through that, and both of us um, are dyslexic, if I remember. And so just we had to work that much harder. And you also, I think, had a period of, was it ME you had, which really wiped you out?
Yeah.
Was that right? Do you want to just tell us
That's right. Yeah.
about both those?
Well, I think dyslexia, probably when you and I were either diagnosed, I was formally diagnosed, and my parents put me through that sort of system whereby I had to go and do a load of psychometric tests, and it came back that my score, whatever the score was, said that I was dyslexic. Was very welcome news, because my parents understood that I struggled with certain things. Now there are some there's amazing awareness, and actually there's a great group on LinkedIn where they call out dyslexia as a superpower, and I kind of, I'm slightly biased, obviously, but I kind of agree. I think it offers a different way of thinking, and there's a hashtag dyslexic thinking, because people with dyslexia may not be able to assimilate letters in the right format that creates comprehensive sentences, but might view challenges in a different format than others and see solutions to problems that others don't see. And I think it's a really powerful tool when utilized. And I think there was even an advert from one of the sort of broader government agencies saying, we're recruiting dyslexics. What a great shift in, it used to be seen as a negative, and it's now seen as a positive. So yeah, I think we were part of a generation where maybe earlier in our lives it was a challenge, but now the children of today are better set up for it.
Yeah, there's a lady called Kate, I've forgotten her surname,
Right. Yeah.
who writes about it on LinkedIn and been on many stages and interviewed Richard Branson, people like that.
That's right. Yeah.
No, fascinating. And then, you had all these experiences. Looking back to when you were 16 to 18, if you met the young Nick Garland then, and all the experiences that you've had now, what would you say? This matters, but that doesn't matter. What would be your tip to a young man or a young person now, 16 to 18?
I think it's also come after my injury as well. It is sort of the highlight of, I'd probably say yes more. I'd go as simple as that, Jonathan. We are offered, both in certainly in our childhood, offered so much in the way of education and development and opportunity, and whether that's physical or mental or musical or whatever it is, I'd probably have said yes more. And it's very easy to be comfortable, and no is a comfortable word when you're saying it, because it closes off the opportunity there and then, or it closes off the challenge to the opportunity there and then. And I think if I can pass one thing on to my children, it's that they should really think about saying yes a bit more. Sometimes we don't like to say yes, but actually the longer term we've enjoyed or we've benefited from it. So that'd be more simple advice.
That's great. And how old and how many children do you have?
I've got two. I've got a 6 and a 9-year-old.
6 and 9. Wow, that's a good challenging age for them to be. But the nice thing is, at least you can chat to them. We've got some grandchildren who are living with us for the last year, Grace and Riley, and 1.5 and 2.5. And Grace is now chattering away to us. Papa, what you doing? What you doing? Can I help? Can I help? And which is really sweet. And Riley just goes, Papa, and just, but we can't get much else from him at the moment. But you could already see him developing. It is such a joy to have children. I've got 4 children of my own, and they're all now married, and I'm sure there'll be more grandchildren on the way. Who knows? Let's go around the Inspiring Leadership Compass. You probably had a look at this, Nick, and just some of the top tips that you'd share from your experiences that you've had. Firstly, the moral quotient. What have you done when you let your values, your principles that you've been brought up on, or you've been trained at, like me at Sandhurst? We don't we're never perfect. There's moments when we let it slip. It doesn't kind of work out. What do you do to bring yourself back onto true north? How do you do that?
I think corrective behavior, calling it out. There was an example many years ago in my former service life where I let something go. Within my chain of command, I saw it happen, witnessed it, brushed it under the carpet, thought it would never come to the fore. Just so happened a similar event happened later on, and I was sort of called in and did you witness anything, Mr. Garland? No. Well, actually, yes, I did. And then you start to question to your point, the moral compass. Why did I not do it then? It was probably because it was a difficult thing to do, but actually it would have been more beneficial for the here and now, but also for the future. So if there's a wrong, write it, and write it as quickly as possible, so it doesn't grow arms and legs, and both in business and in life.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I think when people call out, we've had cases of pop stars or personalities, whether it be Jimmy Savile or whatever. People sort of know when things are not right, but they think, oh, it's someone else must be doing it. It's not me. It'll be somebody else. And if we're a bystander, we're condoning it. It's always a tricky one, I find. Purpose quotient is the next one. Meaning and purpose. Clearly, when you were in the army, you had a clear sense of meaning and purpose, a very clear sense of meaning and purpose. But what gives your life generally a sense of meaning and purpose?
I think it's, as you say, in a former life, it was very, very, very clear to me, because it was sort of part of your day-to-day activity, and in the now, it's making. I think it's got to be about making the lives of those around me better, and that's most critically for my family, and then for those of my immediate group, whether that's friendship group or business group, and then society as a whole, and noting that you have more influence on those around you immediately than you do on society as a whole, but making positive steps without going too far one way to the right or to the left, where you can make a difference. And that would be a legacy for me, would be, that I made a positive difference, whatever it was, and made memories.
Yeah, that's a great one, Nick. And I'm next on to health. Now, clearly, you've had to make health such a big part. Physical health, mental health, getting yourself back from such a traumatic, almost certainly life-ending injury. What's your tip to people listening about, health, well-being, nutrition, sleep, that kind of stuff? Because you've studied this quite seriously, and we've had some good discussions on this topic. What would be some of your tips to people listening?
I think that, they go hand in hand. Mental and physical health go in my view, they go hand in hand. And I'm not absolutely not well read or haven't overly studied it, but as part of my personal recovery, and also the recovery of those around me earlier in my life, made sure that physically you have to continue to move. And whether you have that on your iPhone or your iWatch now that says stand up, move, and everything else that goes with it, that's fine. We understand that movement is key, but actually think about what the positivity is of that movement, where you're going and how you're going to do it. Because raising the heart rate, I know, Jonathan, you're an advocate of exercise, and I wish I could do more, as always, but I try and get out 3 times a week and raise my heart rate, whether that's cycling or running or whatever else it is. And I think the two of those go fundamentally hand in hand, and we don't do enough of it. We don't allow enough time in the working day, and I know that there are some organizations that actually promote and enable fitness in the workplace as a positive factor, and I think you'll get more from your workforce if you do. And then nutrition, really not want to preach on this, unfortunately, because I think like most of us enjoy the best and the worst that both food and drink can give us. But I do understand that there's a balance. Life is a balance in everything that you do, and if I indulge more in one than the other, then I have to go and pay the compass in terms of exercising it out the next couple of days. But yeah.
Well, I'd recommend to you and others listening, if you haven't come across it, an app and an organization called Zoe, ZOE, and they look at your gut microbiome. And I did mine about a year ago, and my wife Lee has now just gone through her test day yesterday. where she eats these cookies, which are then creating blood sugar, and she's wearing a blood sugar monitor, a continuous glucose monitor, and it looks at the impact and it starts to record that. Then she takes her blood, and then she takes a sample from her gut, stool sample, as they say, and they're all sent off. And then you get back, what your sugar response is like, what your blood glucose response is like, and also how healthy or unwise your gut is. So I find that whole area fascinating. And I was down at the Sanger Institute a couple of days ago for Professor Sir Mike Stratton's sort of celebration of his time as the director there. But just the work they've done to crack the DNA code and your biology, and the fact that they will be able to do a sequence of your whole, Nick Garland's whole DNA very soon, so that you'll know what is likely to lead to cancer and death and what you can act on early. Because as with anything, it's best to work upstream and become the National Health Service rather than the National Sickness Service, which is sadly what we've become at the moment, with trillions of pounds being spent on people later in life who didn't look after themselves.
On that, Jonathan, sorry to interrupt. My grandmother, who lived to 105 and died last year.
Wow.
A phenomenal lady and in good health, lived at home until her final days. She insisted on a tot of sherry, and probably in her late 90s would have a Guinness. And I'm not sure that that's what the National Health Service would have prescribed, but she lived a good and healthy life. But yeah,
that is an amazing story. And there is no doubt there's a sort of mixture of some genetics. Like you clearly have got longevity in the family, so congratulations. My father, while he was killed at age 33, flying for the Navy out in Changi, when his plane had a fault and caught fire, and he saved the lives of the pilot who should have flown it and the life of his co-pilot. But he sadly was killed. But he would have, he had a good chance of living to, I think his twin, my aunt, is about 94 now and going strong. So there is that, but also alcohol is, you're drinking ethanol. And I've actually given up alcohol now. I've sort of given it up a couple of times for periods of about 6 months or so. And while on holiday, I took a break and had a couple of glasses of Prosecco, but I just found it pretty unexciting. And so I've gone back to no alcohol, because when I start looking at, I wear one of these Whoop straps, which records your health and well-being. And when I look at the impact of alcohol on my sleep and on my heart rate variance, it's a negative impact for me. So I don't particularly like it. The army tended to sort of have a culture where it forced us all to drink heavily, and you're not a real man unless you can drink massive amounts, which I disagree with. EQ, emotional intelligence. I found in your ability to connect with all the people when we were in France, whatever their backgrounds, whether they were corporals in the military or other injured servicemen or civilians who were raising funds or whatever it might be. You had a great ability to connect with different people. How do you listen well to people, Nick? What's your skills in listening?
I think if you ask my wife, I have very few. But the reality is, I enjoy talking. I enjoy talking to people and understanding a bit about them, because I learn from people, and I think we learn from each other. And we often forget that we when we read and we listen and we hear and we learn, but also we learn so much from other people. So I enjoy talking to people because I find conversations often captivating, interesting, and try and get the best out of people by embracing them in sometimes deep conversations of areas of interest to them. And it then builds a bond and a mutual connection. And it's finding those mutual connections, which I think is the exciting bit, is finding a subject matter, chatting about it, and then the difficult part is remembering it next time you see them.
Yeah,
but that's the fun of it.
But it is a real skill that you have. I just want to acknowledge that. And I think when I look back at my mother, when I was told I was thick and I was going to become a dustman by my teacher because I couldn't spell and I couldn't read very well. My maths were appalling. In those days, they didn't have tests for dyscalculia, which is a problem with numbers, or dyslexia. So I just was left thinking I was thick until I was in my 30s. and I only did a sort of amateur test about the dyslexia. But I think I notice in dyslexic leaders that I meet, they do seem to have to, as my mother said to me, you'll be good with people. It's almost like she was saying to just change your focus a bit from worrying about being academically so smart. And I did notice that in you, that you are interested in people's stories and lives. Resilience, goodness. If a man who has resilience is around, I would turn to you. What would be your top tip to people about resilience, Nick?
There's lots spoken about taking one more step. And lots of leaders have said, just take that one more step, and without taking that first initial step, you're never going to get to the end of the whatever it is, road, marathon, hill, whatever. I think that's really quite obvious, but it's setting yourself realistic goals. Setting yourself realistic goals that you can actually achieve, because with that comes the sort of the mentality, the positivity of success. And nobody likes to be a failure. And I think there's for every 2 steps forward, there's 1 step back, and we all know and understand that sort of that thought process. But when we're being resilient in terms of recovery or progressive, whether that's goal setting in work or it's physical recovery or mental recovery, it's setting a goal, short, medium, and long term, and then sticking to it and delivering against it. Difficult sometimes to do, easy to say, and therefore we break them down into smaller snippets and make them manageable bite-sized pieces, if you will, for some. So
yeah, I think that's a really a good tip, and you have to have the discipline to keep going. I mean, I just think about I'm training with an app called Muscle Builder. I want to put a little bit more muscle on in my old age, because sarcopenia is a problem as you get into your 60s and 70s, that your muscle wastes away. And so I've worked hard to put a little bit of weight on, a bit more muscle, but it requires a good workout routine, personal training, that kind of stuff. But I use the app when there's no personal trainer, just to discipline myself to do that exercise that day. And it's great. You've got this sort of this avatar doing these exercises, and they, come on, you could do it, and this kind of stuff. So it keeps me going. Brand. I mean, you're a very good motivational speaker, Nick. And I think those listening, if you want a good motivational speaker and one hell of a story, get Nick in your organization to share with people in business what it means to do that. But what have you learned from 360? Is there an area you need to work on in 360? Have you ever had any 360 recently in CDW?
I haven't had one recently, and I think it's a really interesting tool, the 360, particularly because you can subordinates will tell you what you want to hear. Those above you might give you the honesty that you think you already know. I think from my side, I think focus, trying to do too much too soon, too often, and therefore not necessarily delivering the outcome that you set yourself or those have set for you. And I think we're all party of that, party to that in life, as we all want to do too much. And maybe that's part of the makeup of sort of success, is I want to do everything and I want to do it brilliantly, and I don't want to delegate all of the tasks. So I think there's a little bit of the old mission command analysis that we use. But
yeah, I think that's a really good. And somebody in one of the tips that I was listening to, I think it might have been Oliver Berkman in his book 4,000 Weeks. You know, from if you were to live to 80, Nick, from birth to 80, you've got 4,000 weeks. Now I'm 61, about to be 62 next March, so I've got about 900 weeks left. If I'm to live to 80, I've got 900 weeks left. Now, that's very finite.
Gosh.
Now, as it was, my brother, he got given 10 weeks notice that he was going to die, and bingo, he'd gone. So I think this really brings home, you cannot do it all. You know, when you're in your coffin and you're about to croak it, your inbox says you got email, and there's always stuff to be done. And I'm finding, I'm just preparing a report on a CEO, a very impressive individual. But one of the things that in the report that was written about him in the psychometrics, his ability to be really focused on a few things. And in this book, or the tip that I thought was really quite counterintuitive, but very clever, write down the 25 things that are really important to you that you really want to do. Take the top 5. You could even, I'm a big one in top 3, But certainly if you want to squeeze yourself, give yourself a couple more. But say take 3 to 5 and put that in a special list. And those are the things you're going to focus on. Then take the 20 or the 22 and don't do them. Do not do this. Have someone working with you not to do those things, because they steal your time allocation. It's not about time management. It's about time allocation. And you cannot allocate time to it all. But if you do those 3 things supremely well, might be like in my case, I want to be a good husband and a good father and a good grandfather. That requires time to be allocated. I could work all hours. I could work late in the evening. I could work weekends and not be around for them. But how about, how important is that? How about that as a challenge to your system?
That is a really good and simple way to put it, Jonathan. I think, I particularly am a slave to the inbox and don't need to be, because it takes focus away from the big ticket items, whatever they are. And I think we've all learned post sort of working from home, COVID, the change in the way in which we work is that we need to be accessible more often for those around us, but also for our working lives. And our working lives and our home lives are now maybe becoming one, which often presents a bit of a challenge. So yeah, I think that having a mental and a physical space to do those functional tasks, whatever they might be, is a really good waypoint and something that I'll take away.
Yeah, and my wife and I had a lovely holiday, 10 days in Greece recently. Just got back about a week or 2 ago. But it's so easy. In the last day of the holiday, you're starting to switch to work mode, and then you're back, and there's a lot to be done, and you can easily undo all that wonderful connection you had with your wife, your children, whoever it might be, your partner, and be back in completely focused and too intense. And so it takes extra effort when you're back in the grind to keep a special connection. And that's a good reminder to me. Legacy. Very briefly, what's yours? But how would you help people to work out what their legacy is going to be?
I'm 40. I don't know what my legacy is yet. I think I've still got significant time to put in to make a legacy. I'd love to say that I've made, as we spoke about earlier, improve the lives of those around me, and make life better for them, whatever that may be. But I would urge that those that, certainly I'm a mentor for a few people in my company, but also externally, is identify key facets, key deliverables they want to do in the medium to long term. And this is not short-term work-based activities or necessarily family-based activities, but what do you want to be known for later in life, and how are we going to go after them? And that's, are you going to go and climb Mount Everest? Not something that's in my repertoire or interests, to be honest, but actually, do you want to go be a good father? You touched on it earlier, father, grandfather, and business leader. Those are the things that I think are key to understanding who you are and where you need to get to for the next phase, whatever that be in work or business life.
Yeah, and you more than anybody who almost had it ending your life, know how short it can be. And so, my father was killed at 33, his brother at 29. He was killed in an air crash with the inventor of the helicopter. He was flying for the inventor. Grandfather flew into a hillside in a Bristol Blenheim during the Second World War. He was an inventor working for the War Office. And then, my brother dying a couple of years ago. It suddenly happens to us that you haven't got all this time. So what I've personally taken from that, and this is about you, it's not about me, but just sharing them what I find helpful, is to have something that if I've got a week left or a year left, I'm still living it today. So for me, it's inspiring leadership, finding inspiring leaders like you and passing on the knowledge to others, learning from you, reading about it, but inspiring leadership in those that I meet, whether it be in my grandchildren, with my wife, with my daughters, with my stepson, my stepdaughter, and particularly with the clients that I work with and their teams. So if I can make a difference on that particular day, if my number is up that evening, I've got a legacy. And of course, you're dead, so you won't care about it anyway. But if you've made a difference to the people you're around, that's important. Last couple of questions, and then we'll go into your top tip, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself and share your top tip, Nick. You've been in various different teams. You've created teams in business and in the military. What do you do when you've got a bad apple that's made the team go toxic? How have you dealt with that?
Well, bad apple make the lot stale, so you've got to take it out, and it's difficult removing, especially if you've got a cohesive team. And the more cohesive the team, the harder the challenge it is to move that individual or those individuals out. And it might be that you need to restructure not just your team, but the teams around you to make it more of a sort of a reshuffle. Bad apples, toxicity, and everything that goes with it, you've got to remove them, you've got to take it out, and you've got to have a plan in place, a robust plan in place with a very clear and unambiguous message as to why that is happening. Because communication will fall foul and will probably question the leadership that's gone with the decision. So making a decision, sticking by it, and then communicating as to why is got to be fundamental when making significant change.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You really struck me with the why. People have to have a clear burning why things are happening, because often if you've got the white collar psychopath in your team, they quite cleverly rubbish the organization and the leader who and you end up covered in shite, where they're looking like they're a savior and they've just been victimized and it's not fair, but actually they've been the one doing it, and so you can be ghosted if you're not careful. So it is important to have the why. And these days I've come across a number of psychopaths who've managed to move on every 2 years from an organization with a compromise agreement and a huge payout. They actually end up being paid twice their salary to go. It's almost like a way of life for some of these people, that they can make a lot of money making a lot of people unhappy. So watch out for those kind of people. And I'm always wary of the sort of compromise agreement where they've left for health reasons or family reasons. No, they were a complete shit. And you can't say that they're complete shit, but just their values and ours did not align. It's not a right fit. And we're helping them find their happiness elsewhere, because it's not here. Favorite book, Nick? What's a favorite book on leadership, and why would you recommend people listen to it? Because you and I are big audiobook people, but listen to it or read it if they're not dyslexic.
Well, we touched on this previously, and there's a book by a gentleman called Jeffrey Wellham called First Light. It's about being a young 17-year-old trainee pilot, Spitfire pilot, during the Second World War. And it talks about, he was part of the greatest generation, and it covers extreme emotional and psychological pressures that he goes through at such a young age, overcomes the challenges, and then leads a normal life post the excitement of his earlier years. And it's a really insightful book, really well documented. It's not a difficult read. It's a little bit jovial in the early phases. It gets quite serious during, obviously, the intensity of the work that they conducted. But I'd really recommend the First Light by Jeffrey Wellham. It's a great book.
I will look it up, and in return, I will recommend to you another one that you'd enjoy, Piece of Cake, which is again about Spitfire and Hurricane pilots. And just I had my friend Errol from Jamaica and General Himalaya from Nepal, who were in my platoon 43 years ago. And a lovely guy, Mike Ainsworth, the squadron leader, took us around the battlefields here, including the bomber command they got up near Lincoln, which is a great memorial to the guys. 68,000 people were killed flying the bombers across to Germany, just from Britain. 68,000 people. You just have no idea of how few of them made it through. And but the story of these young men and the courage they showed at such a young age really sticks with me. Right. So, Nick, for your 2-minute top tip, would you introduce yourself, just mentioning briefly your service and now what you're doing, and give us your practical 2-minute leadership tip? And that'll end us nicely.
Thanks, Jonathan. So, hi, I'm Nick Garland. I work for a company called CDW. I'm a former Army officer. And my top tips for leadership are 2 things, really. Say yes more. It's really difficult to say. It's really easy to say no. And we say no all so often, but yes opens up opportunities. And yes opens up an opportunity for a further conversation and a further dialogue. And equally, empathy. Be full of empathy for people. People will make and break a business, they'll make and break decisions, and they'll also give you the support that you need as and when you need it. The receptionist is as important as the managing director on many occasions. That's it from me.
Well, Nick, thank you. It's been a real pleasure having you on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. Thank you for your service to your king, your queen at the time, and your country, Queen's Dragoon Guards. Are you now the King's Dragoon Guards? They get changed, or is it always keeps it? You'd have to keep changing it. That's right, I remember that. But thank you for your service as an officer of the Queen's Dragoon Guards, and I'm so relieved that you came back from that horrendous injury, but you still are living with it. And thank you for all that you do for Walking with the Wounded and Help for Heroes as an ambassador for them. So great having you on the podcast. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Jonathan.